Good evening and welcome to Artist Talk on Art on Monday, March 13th, 2023. I'm Jacqueline Rada, Secretary of the ATOA Board of Directors. Tonight's presentation, Estate Planning for Artists, will be moderated by Mitch Pilnick. It will be a wide-ranging discussion of many of the aspects of planning for the future which artists should be considering implementing as they move forward in their careers and lives. This copyrighted Zoom event is a part of our Winter Spring series in our 49th year. ATOA has presented over 8,500 artists in more than 1,000 recorded events. Next week, we will delve into women in art in a panel featuring Babs Reingold from quote, Pandora's Box, the 365 Project. Be sure to tune in. Now, tonight's event will run about 90 minutes, and you will have a chance to direct questions to the panel in the last 10 to 15 minutes. You may use the chat function throughout the talk, and questions and comments will then be read at the conclusion. And now let me introduce the moderator. Mitch Pilnick holds a degree in art history and is a longtime board member of Artist Talk on Art. He has planned and moderated a number of panels and events for this organization. His main focus is the business of art, such as finances, insurance, marketing practices, residencies, and artist promotion. And now, my pleasure to present Mitch Pilnick. Go ahead, Mitch.
We're good? You hear me? Uh-oh.
Yes.
Yes, we hear you, Mitch. Now you're unmute yourself, Mitch.
Okay. So thanks, Jackie, for the intro. Much appreciated. And thanks so much for all the participants. It's a nice audience tonight. And this is a topic that I definitely understand very well, coming into the insurance industry in 1980. And my background at the time was in life insurance and financial planning. I since focus only on art insurance, but I certainly understand the need, and especially to have the professional people for us to advise and recommend. So without further ado, I'm going to start off with Eric Siegeltuch, who I know for a number of years now, and he was the one that said, Mitch, I'd love to do a panel on this. And I said, great idea. So let me give you Eric's biography. After a 50-plus year career in the art world, culminating the ownership of my own gallery in Soho, I decided to switch gears and devote myself primarily to the financial planning needs of the artists I had previously been representing, with the thought that what I was now doing was an extension of my physical representation of their careers in the gallery. My previous positions in various New York galleries, ranging from Pearls to Alan Frumpkin, Max Hutchinson, and Touchstone Galleries, as well as a stint at the Guggenheim Museum, which gave me the experience and contacts necessary to provide this added layer of career management these artists required. In 1992, I shifted my focus to primarily becoming a financial advisor and closed the gallery. My associations range from the Moni Group to MetLife and now to Cetera Financial Specialists, which I have been associated for the last 9 years. So, Eric, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you.
Recording in progress.
I'm sorry?
Oh, unmute myself.
I can be heard now? Okay,
Yes, yes.
good. Thank you, Mitch, for that warm introduction. Judging by the biographies and the experience of my colleagues on this panel, I feel certain that this time will be well spent by all of us. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts about the critical need for both artists and non-artists to address our planning issues well in advance of actually needing to put them in place. As you mentioned, I've been involved in the art world ever since college graduation. Had many positions, culminating in the ownership of my own gallery in Soho back in the 1980s. It would thrill me to think that at least some of you may actually remember it. I freely admit now, however, so many years later, that if I had been a better planner than a curator, I likely would still be in my gallery today. That, however, was not the case. So in the late 80s, during one of the many subsequent downturns in the art market, I stepped back and ultimately changed direction and joined the financial services world, where I've been for the last 31 years. As we all can agree, the pursuit and love of art isn't something that one can just deny and walk away from. So I've cherished the chance to still work with artists and galleries, helping them with their planning needs. That's what I'd like to talk about tonight. Now, by way of diving in, as we're all visual people here, I'd invite you to think of the planning process as akin to throwing a rock in a pond, creating a ripple effect of many concentric circles of larger and larger dimensions. As I'm sure you're aware, there are many different things you can do to put your plans in place. But I first ask that you think hard about what you want to achieve with those plans and what you want them to look like. You'll need to see those goals as reflective of what you ideally like to see happen upon your passing or your possible future inability to handle your own affairs. In addition to what I'd like you to focus on what you'd like to see happen, also think through the things you'd like not to happen if no plan is put in place. I see this as the innermost circle and the most important as well. If you don't know and understand a potential future scenario, then how can you choose from among the many ways to achieve those goals? Now, an important side note, as was told to me so many times, please not only think about these goals, but commit them to paper. The plan that gets written gets done. Now, once you've given yourself an understanding and a prioritization of your goals, only then can you begin the process of getting more specific about how to achieve them. This exercise should also include what you've done thus far to put things in motion. So, what's inside the next circle? I'd suggest that you make sure you have an updated and accurate inventory of the works in your studio, also known as your life's work. So many artists are too busy making more work that they forget to catalog what work is already in existence. To state the obvious, this is crucial. I know that software programs exist to do this for galleries, and I have to assume that they're also available for artists, and they may even be the same software. You may want to look into that for your own needs. Now, once you've done this, which I won't pretend is an easy task, hopefully you might get the assistance of an intern or a studio assistant to help you with this, because it's a big job. Now let's talk about whether you're working with a gallery or multiple galleries. Do you have an accurate consignment form for all the works that exist outside your studio? I'm sure we've all heard stories about disagreements about how many works are on hand in a gallery, what's sold, what's not sold, what's still there. And it wouldn't surprise you to know that this can certainly lead to some messy situations, especially if you aren't around to provide firsthand knowledge. I don't mean this as a dig on art dealers, since I am one as well, but things happen. Galleries are worried about the day-to-day of how to pay the rent and pay all the other bills, and things sometimes slip through the cracks. But also, as part of your relationship with your gallery, have you ever thought about whether they are competent not only to handle these day-to-day affairs and create sales, etc., but are also expressing a longer-term willingness to step in and work with your estate in your absence? When I had my gallery, which admittedly was a very long time ago, I really can't remember having that kind of discussion a responsible gallerist should have been having with you today. Nobody was really thinking along those lines in those days. Now that we're all 35 to 40 years older, they and we certainly are thinking about it. Now, I realize that some, if not many people listening in tonight may not be working with a gallery. So in effect, you're on your own. Now what? If you don't have the backup of a gallery, you have to create your own network to act on your behalf. What do we mean by a network? Starting with your family, of course, and then working outwards to supporters such as friends or colleagues, museum curators, advisors who may have bought your work in the past, and other people who are intimately familiar with you and your work. But once you've identified them as possibilities, you need to determine if they are competent and interested in such a job, which of course involves arranging your personal affairs as well as the issues of storage of your art. This can certainly be a burden on people who are neither interested or competent to do it. You know how well this job is for yourself. Just imagine how difficult it would be for someone new to the project. Now, it would also be important that they themselves are art world knowledgeable and can network on your behalf. I'm sure Jamie will speak to that issue from her own experience. Now, before you say to yourself that you don't have such a network, I ask you to think harder and cast a wider net. Think outside the box. Now, I'm sure that Britt will go into far greater detail from the specific ways of making this happen from a legal standpoint. I just want to lightly touch on a few things, such as the critical need to have a current will, reflecting your wishes about what you'd like to have happen to your estate, and whom you would want to be responsible for making that happen. It may surprise you to know that if you don't have such a will or trust, the state will have one for you, and it may not bear any resemblance to what you had hoped would happen. Additionally, there's the opportunity of gifting, where each person is entitled to gift away up to $17,000 in value each year. That's the number for 2023. How the term value is computed for an artist is, at best, ambiguous, so I'll let Britt delve more deeply into that than I'm competent to do. The third tax fact you may want to be aware of, although I feel pretty sure that none of us here have to give all that much consideration to it, is what is known as the federal estate tax exemption, whereby each person is entitled to exempt $12,920,000 of value before their possible estate tax is computed. Add to that New York's inheritance exemption, they have a different name for it, which is $6,580,000. Now, what do we mean by your estate? It comprises the total value of what you own. Your home, which may be a loft which you bought many years ago for $10,000 and could now be worth $3 to $4 million, as well as your art and your other assets, etc. This can get potentially complicated if you have a documented selling history, but probably not so complicated that you come up against that very high tax exemption amount. The bottom line is that you may well have a higher asset value than you might have realized, which might make achieving your goals that much more possible. Interestingly enough, people were far more worried about these numbers when the exemption was only $600,000 not that long ago. Since it's been raised so significantly, I wouldn't give it that much thought, except for the fact that this number is for 2023 only, and the tax bill on which it is based, or at least the parts of it which would pertain to those of us in the middle class, will expire in 2025. Thereafter, who knows? I won't pretend that going beyond what I've mentioned so far does require some financial means. Without getting bogged down in details, let me just say that the role of a financial planner is to help you analyze and prioritize both your goals and your current assets and liabilities so that such knowledge can help you achieve those goals as efficiently as possible. Now, I'd like to close with two somewhat related stories, which I think will put this discussion into better perspective for you. The first one, now that I see Bob Stackhouse is on the call, he'll be familiar with this. The first has to do with a relationship I formed with an artist whom you may know well, Milton Resnick, while I was director at the Max Hutchinson's Gallery. Now, when I left the gallery to form my own, I showed his work, and when I closed the gallery, we remained in close touch. After I started to learn a bit about financial matters related to estate planning, I had a meeting with him and with Pat Pasloff, his wife and fellow artist. Not surprisingly, neither of them had wills, trusts, or done anything much to plan for the future. I finally convinced them to do wills and set aside funds to make that happen. They did do that. Years later, the result is the Milton Resnick Pat Pasloff Foundation on Eldridge Street, which many of you may have visited already. But I'll never forget my conversation with him when I asked what he thought might happen in the absence of the planning we were now doing. His answer, to those people here who may know him, would not be at all surprised at his answer. He said that on his death, he suspected that whomever came to clear out his home would likely throw his paintings out with the trash. Thankfully, that never came to pass. Planning was the difference. Now, the second, somewhat related story has to do with another artist you may also know well, Deborah Remington. She was represented by a well-known and well-respected gallery on 57th Street, Pat Hamilton. Now, once Pat closed the gallery, Deborah's career stalled. And I don't need to tell you that in many respects, the art world is an adjunct of the fashion world. And when fashions change, as they often do, many artists' careers get lost in the shuffle. Now, a number of years later, after the gallery closed, Deborah herself passed away. Fortunately, her estate plan was in order, and a very well-respected and connected curator consultant was brought on board to shepherd the future of her career. Net result, Deborah has been rediscovered, as so many artists have been recently, and she is included in museum shows worldwide, represented by a number of galleries, both here and in Europe, and sales have been made at pretty high levels. My friend is also at work on a retrospective monograph on Deborah's work. The reason I talk about these two cases is because they're textbook examples of what I hope you envision for yourselves as well. It's definitely achievable, but only if you start today. Now, in closing, if anybody on this call has a question or issue which they think I might be able to help them with, but you would prefer to discuss it offline, by all means, you can contact me directly at 914-327-3863, or refer to my website, which is simply ericsiegeltuch.com, where you can find all my contact information. I can also share my screen with this information as well, if that's appropriate. Now, thank you again for listening tonight, and I wish you well in your own planning process. I, like all of you, am also eager now to hear what Jamie and Britt have to say on this very important and critical topic. Thank you for listening.
Okay, everybody hear me? Does everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We don't see you though, but we hear you.
I'm having technical difficulties tonight.
All right, we hear you.
Great. All right. The next panelist is Jamie Johnson, who Eric was kind enough to include and refer me to on the panel. I'm going to give you her bio. Okay, Jamie worked in the corporate world for over 30 years in product design and management. In 2001, she retired to a broader range of endeavors. For 3 years, she was executive director of the School of Hope, helping to build schools for girls in Afghanistan. More directly, using her degree in art history, in 2006, she founded Art Connects New York, a not-for-profit which in its 13-year history placed hundreds of original artworks in over 40 social services throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. At the same time, she developed her own art practice, focusing on leather-based jewelry and paper collage. In 2007, Jamie's priorities shifted after the death of her husband, artist William S. Dutterer. Thank you so much. Since she has worked to ensure that his life's work is not lost, showing, selling, and placing his work in public and private venues, publishing a monograph on the artist, creating a comprehensive website, placing work in museums nationwide, exhibiting and selling the work to various institutions, and creating the William S. Dutterer Trust to further secure Dutterer's legacy. Jamie reads widely to learn the wisdom of others. Her deep abiding interest in the interconnectedness of all aspects of the natural world and special interest in the wisdom of Earth's non-human residents, she looks for ways humans can learn from our cohabitants to recover our world's health and well-being. So Jamie, thank you so much for being a panelist tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Delighted that there are so many people and on the call. And Eric, that was a really good, solid presentation. Thank you for that. I think what I will be able to give to all of you is some more specifics on what you need to do, this real basic steps of what you need to do. Let me see if I can make screen sharing work here. Screen share. All right, we'll do this. You can tell I'm used to doing this. Share. All right, am I here?
Yes.
All right, I've lost all of you, but I will just talk to my screen. So as you heard, my husband William Dutterer died in 2007, which set me on this track of well, what do I do with all this work? So what I will tell you is the work that I have done over the years since then. Most of this, virtually all of it, I've done since Bill passed away. Most of it is work that you can be doing now, and I can't encourage you more to do it. It's the kind of work that works best if you're doing it in small bits at a time, like once a week or once a month or something on that order. It'll give you control over how you want all of this stuff done. And the other thing that I will just add to that is that it's a real, I'm sorry? It's a real kindness to whoever takes over your estate after you're gone to have much of this work done. So just to give you a little background on William Dutterer, he was my husband for over 40 years. He was a West Virginia, Western Maryland kind of guy, held a BFA and MFA from MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art. He was pretty much considered an artist's artist. He was far more interested in making his work than he was in making a career for himself.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you please move your screen over a little bit to the right?
To the right, like so.
Because part of it is cut off.
Oh, I can't see it at all.
Okay,
So,
all right.
is this good for everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
The left half.
Great.
Okay, fine. Yes.
So when Bill died, he did have a will, but he had done no estate planning. He had no recent price history, no gallery representation, and a lot of work in the studio. This is just a representation of some of his work over the years, over a 40-year career. Over 2,000 pieces of, well, between 2,000 and 3,000 pieces of work of one sort or another. And it was all just living in his studio in one shape or another. When he died, suddenly you have all this business to deal with. And the first one is, well, we got to settle the will. And first question right after you got to settle the will is, well, does this work have any value? And there are major tax implications, whether you say it does have value or it does not have value. And I'm sure that Britt will be able to inform you more specifically about that. In any case, I decided that his work did absolutely have value. And so that meant that I had to have an appraisal done of the whole body of work. And what's the whole body of work? Well, a lot of work. That meant that I needed to count everything. And as I counted it, I was giving each piece an identifying number. That was the most immediate to do, is just identify each piece. In my case, I did it, I just kind of started counting at 1 and kept going. I would suggest that it's a better way to deal with it would be to add a little more information in that identifying number, like perhaps the year that the piece was made. Perhaps you want to identify it as a drawing or a sculpture or a painting or whatever medium you want to use for the, or category you want to use for it. It just means that if a number comes up, you have a little more information than nothing when all you have is a number. Next thing on the agenda was protecting the work. That means properly wrapping it so that it is safe, giving it a label so you're able to find it, and giving it proper storage. And in that regard, racks for the paintings, work that's in flat files needs to be at minimum needs to have glassine leafed in between each piece. And then Eric mentioned a database. There are a whole slew of commercial databases. Mostly they are designed for commercial art galleries, but most of them also have an individual artist version of them. Often it's really basically the same database that you're using, but for an artist, your price is going to be a little deeper, a little cheaper, less expensive, as we say, than for a gallery that's dealing with the work of many artists. So for that database, you want to have, that's where your unique identifier really comes into play. The database will help you describe the pieces of work. It will also give you a uniform description for them, uniform format. You'll want to have a working photograph at least to accompany the information about any piece of work you have in the database. A working photograph that you take on your phone is fine for this purpose. The other thing that you want to do, and Eric touched on this a little bit as well, is that database should locate each piece of work that you have. You may know where things are in your studio, but nobody else or very few other people probably have a clue about that. So you want to locate things that are in your studio, that goes into the database. What else goes into the database is pieces that have been sold or given away. Where is that work? If it was sold, how much did you sell it for? All that information is really key to having a good handle on your oeuvre and its value as you're developing your legacy. One other thing that Eric didn't mention, but that you should be thinking about and keeping track of is your archive, which is all the information about you and your work that isn't the work itself. And it doesn't need to be everything about you, but it should be everything about your studio practice. You want to keep track of invitations to exhibitions, catalogs, newspaper articles, even things like your paintbrushes. A lot of artists, there's the Andy Warhol story that he kept everything right down to taxi receipts. That's New York City taxis, not tax returns, but you could probably do your tax returns in there too. But that information is all going to be relevant to handling your work going forward after you're not there to be handling it yourself. When Bill died, I just had this wonderful thought. I mean, it seemed pretty grim at the time, but I thought, well, I will find a gallery to represent the estate and everything will be taken care of because that gallery will do all of this keeping track of the work. Silly me. One of the major hurdles I ran into was that Dutterer was unknown. There were very few people in the art world who knew anything about him or about his work, which sort of turned my task then into making him and his work visible. So what does that mean? It means creating a presence. There is a comprehensive website. You're all welcome to visit. I'd be delighted. It's williamdutterer.com. I created a book, a monograph on his work that's about 150 pages of color images of the work. And it's got 3 essays by curator, art critic essays about the work. And the other piece that I'm sure you're all engaged in it to some degree or another is social media. I have been a little slow in approaching all of the different varieties of that. I'm on Instagram and we're developing more of that as time moves forward. I didn't do all of this alone, and it's taken a long time. An attorney, an accountant, preparators, or studio assistants, wrapping all that work is a big job, and keeping track of where things are is also a big job. So preparator kinds of people, assistant kinds of people are really important, as are people who in the art world who can advise you. I learned early on that having a professional photographer taking images of the work was really critical. Those working photographs you may have in your database are great for reference, but they're not what you need to have to send out to museums or press organizations or even to put on your website. So you're going to want to have really fine, high resolution photographs. The other item I just added to the list was data input for that wonderful database you have created. And It's not a static item. It's not a static program. You will find that you are often visiting it and updating various pieces of information as time goes on. So having somebody available to do data input for you is really tremendously helpful. Eric was right, that building a network, and that's what I had been doing for many years. Building a network is the way that you move forward with this. In my case, neither Bill's nor my family had the wherewithal to be of much help in terms of moving the artwork forward, but they've been really great keeping my spirits up about it all. Friends and colleagues, just this for an example for you, since Bill died, friends put together a retrospective exhibition called True Dutterer. Carol Mickett actually came up with that name for it. True Dutterer was a retrospective at the Katzen Museum at American University in Washington, DC. There was a second one that came from friends. This one came from a contact I had at MICA. One of the curatorial students did her master's thesis on Bill's work, and that resulted in another major exhibition. Art world professionals, I knew a few. I also have done a lot of cold calling by emails or snail mails, accompanied, of course, by marvelous images of the work. And that's a long haul, but it's also one that does bear fruit if you're patient with it. Arts organizations are a way to find other art world professionals. I happen to be a member of Art Table, which has been very useful. And there are a number of other ones as well. I also joined an artists collective. It's called Splice Connector. It is part of something called the Shim Art Network. That's been very helpful because it allows me to have Bill's work available on the Artsy website, which is not possible unless you are represented by a gallery. At this point, Dutterer is represented by a gallery also, but the Artist Collective was the first way that I had to get into Artsy. After 7 or 8 years, I was really finding myself into burnout land and thought, well, where do I go from here? I cannot throw all this work away. There's no way that's going to happen. Remaining as an estate as things were is not an option. I did not find that there was enough structure for that to be viable for me moving much farther forward. I did think a lot about creating an artist endowed foundation. I would still like to do that. The issues, I have not done that yet because to begin with, artist endowed foundations require a significant amount of funding because they have lots of overhead with them. The greatest among them is that they are heavily regulated by the IRS. And they also require some kind of public programming as part of their being. I was not prepared to do that. I didn't have the funds to do that. So in lieu of that, I did create a trust, the William S. Dutterer Trust. The trust holds the work, and because there are trustees involved besides myself, it has given me structure that has been tremendously helpful in moving forward. I worked with an arts attorney to create an irrevocable trust. That's a really hard word to say. It was set up with a 10-year lifespan, which will undoubtedly be extended. I have 4 trustees. In addition to myself, I have a lawyer, I have a business person, I have an artist, I have a member of my family and myself. So I've tried to spread this across different areas of interest and expertise. The trustee is overseeing a strategy for the dispersal of the work. It also takes a look at the finances of where we are and what kind of finances we need going forward. It's helping make decisions about what work to gift to institutions and work to sell through auction and commercial galleries. At this point, we're about halfway through the trust life, so we've learned a lot in 5 years and we're revising those documents. But in those 5 years, the trust has really been helpful in generating some successes. We have had sales. We have gotten the work exhibited in art fairs and commercial galleries and institutions. There's been a major auction sale accomplished. The work is now represented in 5 different museums around the country. We are continuing to work on that. Part of continuing to work on that is just developing more social media, more web presence, and a growing press coverage. So I'm feeling a little breathless now. I hope that I've given you some help in terms of details of the kinds of things that you should be thinking about doing. I'm absolutely happy to answer questions either online or if you ask questions via williamdutterer.com, they will come directly to me, and I'm happy to give you any help that I can. So thank you. I appreciate the chance to talk with you all.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Mitch, are you here?
What happened to our moderator? He did say he was having some tech issues, so let's assume that he
Okay,
got.
now we're good.
There he is.
Everybody hears me now, right?
Yes.
Yes. Can everyone please mute themselves? There are a couple of people that are not muted. Thank you.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All righty. My volume seems to be very low tonight. All righty. Next, Jamie, thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent. Next is Britt Berner. And I did not know Britt until maybe about 6-8 weeks ago, when across my email was an email announcement from VLA, Volunteer Lawyers of the Arts, and that Britt was doing also a Zoom presentation. So she was kind enough to say yes and participate tonight. And I will give you her short bio, but I would like to say, Britt, you get the award for the best background tonight.
Oh, thank you.
Britt Berner, Esquire, is a partner at Berner Law Group PC, a boutique law firm concentrating in the areas of elder law, estate planning, trusts and estates, and real estate. Serving clients from New York City to the East End, she has been named a Super Lawyers Rising Star and an Outstanding Woman in Law by Hofstra University. Britt serves as Vice Chair of the Elder Law and Special Needs Planning section of the New York State Bar Association. Britt also serves as a charter member of the Advisory Council of the Katz Institute for Women's Health at Northwell. So Britt, thank you very much for participating. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm just switching to my PowerPoint. Okay. So just a little background about Burner Law Group, just so you know who you're talking to beyond the bio that was read. So Burner Law Group is a firm that was actually started by my mother, who is my partner that I practice with about 28 years ago. And I joined her in 2014. And we have 4 offices. I'm here in our Manhattan office today, and we have offices as far out to the East End as East Hampton. And we have a lot of different clients. And over the course of my career, a lot of artists have come in, and we have created estate planning for a lot of people of varying, as the others have talked about tonight, you know, of varying success and notoriety. And obviously, we know that what art is worth while someone is alive is not necessarily the same as what it might be worth after their death. And it certainly, at the very least, is their life's work and their legacy and their passion. And so people always ask me about value of things, and, you know, there's a monetary value, and that has taxes associated with it and all sorts of issues. But there's also the legacy part of this, and the concept that you want others in the world to see this art that you've spent your life creating. And so I try to really honor that with my artist clients. Okay, so we're going to get started today. This is my contact information, and when I'm done, I can also put it up in the chat. But this is my information down here, and that is my direct email address, bburner@burnerlaw.com. Okay, so estate planning. So what is estate planning? I liked that, Jamie, in your presentation, you said he had a will, but he didn't have estate planning. That is so important to realize the difference, right? A will is a document. It's not a plan. Now, it could be part of an estate plan, and it could be something that gets you to the goal that you're trying to get to, but in the end, it's just a document. So I strongly urge people not to use LegalZoom, not to do it on their own, because having the document isn't enough. You need to understand what the document will do and what will happen upon your death with that document. And so whether you retain an attorney to advise you, or you go through VLA or some other service that gives free or less expensive legal assistance, I recommend having legal assistance when creating a will as part of your estate plan. So an estate plan, as you see here, it's a legal mechanism to direct your assets upon your death. And we're always looking to protect assets and minimize tax. I'm going to talk about the numbers again, and it was discussed by Eric earlier in the presentations, but you know, there are very high asset exemption levels right now, federal and state. So a lot of people are not worried about having a taxable estate. When we talk about your estate, we're really talking about everything: the value of life insurance, the value of personal property, all of these different things, your works of art, the art that you've created, the art that you've collected, that you've either purchased or were gifted to you by other artists. These are all the part of your estate. Okay. So before I get to the after death stuff, I just want to throw out the importance of these estate planning documents. To the right, the bottom and the right of your screen, you'll see living will, healthcare proxy, and agent for control of remains. These are documents, you know, the healthcare proxy says who makes medical decisions for you if you can't make them for yourself because you're incapacitated. The living will talks about if you would want extreme measures. And the disposition of remains talks about what will actually happen with your remains after your death and who's in charge of making sure, for example, that you're cremated if you choose to be cremated, or that you're buried in a certain place if that's what you choose. So those documents are important. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because we only have a little bit of time today, but I do want to point them out. The power of attorney is really important because all of these things that we're talking about and all the things Jamie just talked about that she's been doing for her husband after his death, there's also a situation in which somebody could become incapacitated, and all of those same things need to be done, but through a power of attorney, through somebody else, because that individual isn't able to represent their own art. And so having a valid and a robust power of attorney document is really important for your estate plan. I had a situation where we had an artist who, a friend of his came in to see us, and he was basically had lost his mental capacity because of extreme dementia. He was unable to handle things, and he didn't have anything in place. And it was really awful to see, because what ended up happening was we had to petition the court to appoint a guardian to represent him. He didn't have any friends or family that could act. And I know the prior two speakers talked about getting your team together. He didn't have a team, and he didn't have someone who could step in and be his power of attorney agent and act on his behalf. And so the court appointed a lawyer off the court's list who became his guardian. Now, that's not always the best thing, but it's not always the worst. In a lot of circumstances, if you own your home and you have some financial assets and there's a court-appointed guardian representing you, that might be okay. But when you're talking about an artist who needs to be represented in terms of their art and handled properly, what are the odds that the court-appointed attorney who practices in this area of the law is going to have that art knowledge? And so, as important as the after-death documents are, I really want to stress the importance of having a robust power of attorney, especially if you are an artist. So I'm going to talk about the difference between a will and a trust. They are both documents. A will is a document that says what's going to happen with your assets upon your death. It only controls assets in your sole name with no beneficiary. So your art would be an example, right? Because it's in your possession, it's your artwork, and there's nobody else who owns it. But for example, a bank account with a joint owner, that would not be passed on according to your will. A retirement account with a beneficiary listed, that will not pass pursuant to your will. That will pass to the beneficiary that you've named. So what I see sometimes is someone says, okay, I'm going to put a joint owner or a beneficiary on all my financial accounts. And then it ends up that we have to probate the will. And I'm going to talk about what probate is in a second. We have to probate the will in order for somebody to take ownership and control of the artwork. But now all of the money has been designated out. And so now we have artwork that has to be handled, and all those things that, and I'm glad that I went after Jamie, because all those things that she just talked about having to be done, those things cost money, right? Cataloging, packing, temperature controlled storage, all these things cost money. And so if all the money is gone according to a beneficiary designation and the art is left, who's paying for all those things? So it's really important to make sure, again, that's why just having a document isn't enough. You need a plan. A will has to go through probate. One of the most common misconceptions is that if you have a good will, you can avoid probate. They need each other. A will needs probate and probate needs a will. They don't exist outside of each other. So the word probate means the process of taking somebody's will, the original will, to the surrogate's court in the county in which they live in when they die, and asking the court to validate that document, to say, yes, this is a valid document. Nobody's contesting. If somebody did contest, we've moved that to the side because it wasn't valid. And yes, this is a valid will. It can be followed. And the person that is named as executor in the document gets officially appointed by the court. So if you have a will and you die, and the person that you've nominated, it's only a nomination at this point, you've nominated to be your executor, goes to the bank with a copy of your will or the original will and says, okay, my friend died, here's the will, I'm the executor. The bank is going to say, you need letters testamentary. That means you have to go through the probate process so that you get that resulting document with the fancy colors and the raised seal that says that you are the executor and you can collect these assets. So we get calls all the time from people and they say, I went to the bank and they say I need a letter from a lawyer. Well, no, it's letters testamentary, and that is the end product of the probate process. Now, the probate process requires a few things. It requires notification of your legal next of kin, whether or not they're named as beneficiaries. It requires that they all receive notice that your will is being probated and an opportunity to either waive any objection, they sign a document and have it notarized, or they have an opportunity to come to the court on a certain day at a certain time and put in their objections. And that's when things get messy, right? Someone's objecting, and now we're in this whole litigation over this will. So we often tell people, the people who should avoid probate. Now, these days, a lot of people should avoid probate because especially down here, I should have said at the beginning, by the way, that what I'm referring to is the process in New York State. And so while some of you are out of state, there might be very similar things in your home state. You should make sure you're getting local advice. I usually remember to give my disclaimer at the beginning. So in New York, you have to give notice to your legal next of kin. So what if you have 2 children and they're your closest relatives and you're disinheriting one and leaving everything to the other? That person might come in and contest. Not necessarily because they'll win, but because they can be a nuisance and maybe be paid to go away. And they end up more, a little bit to go away and not pay attorney's fees is better than nothing. So if you're disinheriting one of your legal next of kin, you might want to avoid probate. If you don't know who your legal next of kin are, people come in all the time and they say, oh, don't worry, I just need a simple will. I'm very easy. I have no one. That is a nightmare for probate. And I'll tell you why. You have to give notice to your legal next of kin. So while we all might not know who our legal next of kin are, we have them. We all have them, right? If you go up your family tree and out all the branches, you will eventually find a live person. It might take a lot of digging, which should sound like a lot of money and work, which it is. But they have to be found, and we have to satisfy the court that we've tried to find them, and we have to go through ridiculous lengths to find them. So if you're disinheriting those next of kin or you don't know who they are, you're going to make that probate process a really long, drawn out, expensive process. So we try to avoid probate. Also, I heard some people on here say they're down in Florida. So for those of you who are in multiple states, if you own property in multiple states, you have to probate the will in 2 states. So if you live up here in New York, but you also have a condo down in Florida that you go to in the winter, you have to actually probate your will where it's your primary residence and then do what we call an ancillary probate, a second probate in the other state in order to pass that property along. So again, that's the kind of person who might want to avoid probate. I'm not going to go into big details on these, but if you have minors as beneficiaries, you want to avoid the courts and probate. If you have disabled beneficiaries, you want to avoid the courts and probate. If you have a taxable estate, so over those numbers that Eric talked about, which I'll talk about again at the end, I'll put up on the screen. If you have a taxable estate, you probably want to avoid probate because in New York, certainly, and in the downstate counties, there's a large delay and taxes are due, and when they're due, and it's 9 months from date of death, no questions asked. So you want to make sure that the people that you're trusting to handle things for you can handle things. Also, if you're worried about, you have artwork and you're actively working with a dealer or a gallery, and you don't want that to halt because there's nobody legally represented to handle your art. So you can see I have a lot of reasons why a will isn't necessarily the best plan. And for a lot of people, we recommend a revocable living trust. I know there was talk about irrevocable trust a few minutes ago, but I don't think we have time to quite go that deep. But today we're just going to talk about the revocable living trust. A trust is a document, but it creates a legal entity. So Britt Burner could make the Britt Burner Revocable Trust. It would be my social security number, so there's no additional tax requirements. For all purposes, I own the assets that I put in this trust. But because, remember, probate is assets in my sole name with no beneficiary. Well, if Britt Burner Trust owns the asset, not Britt Burner individually, I don't have anything in my sole name and I avoid probate. So the main reason that we create a revocable living trust is to avoid that probate process and have continuity of the handling of your assets after your death without this break for probate. So it is a legal entity. There's a document. The document has the rules of the game. So they're often lengthy. And this is where I tell you, don't give your lawyers a hard time if there's a lot of words in there, right? We like to avoid ambiguity. We want to make sure that anything that your trustee needs to do, which when you're creating a revocable trust, right at the outset, it's you. But if you become incapacitated or upon your death, it's whomever you put to succeed you. You want to make sure that those people or that person have the ability to do all those things. And so the powers have to be in the trust document, but the trust is the rules of the game. So someone may call me and say, I'm a trustee of a trust. Can I do X? And my response is, I don't know. Let's look at the trust document and see what it allows you to do. And so that trust creates that separate entity, but then you have to put things in the trust. So with a property like a house or a condo, you would change the deed so that the owner of the house or the property was the trust. For a co-op, it might be changing your co-op shares if your building allows it. For a bank account, it's going to the bank and changing the owner of the bank account. For your artwork, it's an assignment of personal property, an assignment of the artwork, and in certain circumstances, an assignment of any intellectual property rights that you have in that or attached to that artwork. And so this is because most of us or most people who create art don't necessarily have ownership papers, right? For a deed to a house, I have a paper in my hand that says I own this house. But if you have a loft full of artwork, there's nothing that makes it belong to you except the fact that you created it and it's in your possession. And so this assignment document is how we move the assets into the trust. Without that, it's not helpful to do the trust. You have to put things in it. So there's a lot of this is reviewing what I did, what I've already said. So we want to avoid the probate, which avoids expenses to some extent, dealing with copyrights. It allows the grantor is the creator of the trust. It allows assets who can control them during your incapacity. There's privacy. I didn't even talk about that as another reason to avoid probate. The probate of your will is a public proceeding. So as soon as your will is filed with the court, it is a public record. And so a lot of people don't like that. They want it to be separate, and a trust is a private, but terminating a trust at death or passing on a trust at death is a private process. The interfamily conflict I talked about, continuity, and avoiding that probate in other states. So why might you need a trust? And this says a trust or a will, but really this is going to be a trust for the most part. So tax planning. So if we have, again, I'm going to kind of give snippets of information just in the object of saving time. But if you have two spouses in New York, you each have a $6.58 million estate tax exemption. So if I'm a single person and I have less than 6.58 million, there's no taxes at my death. If I have a spouse and together we have 8 million, I don't want the assets to come back compound in the survivor's estate, because now 8 is over the 6.5 and now there's a taxable estate. So sometimes we have to do planning in our documents to make sure we use both spouses' exemptions, because here in New York, it's use it or lose it, and you can't save it like you can with the federal government. For those who have minor children, so appointing a guardian or leaving assets in a trust for that child, creating trust for beneficiaries. So if you're leaving assets to your children or to a friend or to a spouse, and you want to make sure that that person has creditor protection or divorce protection, or maybe they have judgment liens against them, you can create a trust within your document to protect that individual from really the outside world. You want to control what happens with your assets when you die. So you want to say, who's going to get it? How's it going to be handled? Who's going to be in charge, and making sure my wishes are followed. And avoid intestate succession. Eric said earlier, if you don't have a will, New York State will have one for you. And that's what intestate succession is. Dying intestate means you die without a last will and testament, or without any estate planning documents. If you have a spouse and children, most people don't realize that if you die without a will, anything that's not joint with your spouse or names your spouse as beneficiary, if it has to pass through probate, or we call it administration when you don't have a will, if it has to pass through administration, your spouse gets the first 50,000 and half of the balance. So your spouse, if you have children, does not automatically get everything. And a lot of people don't realize that. And then if you are one of those people who does not have next of kin that you know, you could end up in a situation where your assets are going to some long lost family member that we find through the administration process. So we want to avoid that. So artists, specifically, we want to dictate what happens with your artwork. We want, like I said, you want to say, this is who's in charge of it. I had someone who, she wanted to name her sister to be trustee after her death, but her sister doesn't know anything about her artwork. She has two friends who are very intimately involved with her artwork and would know what to do and have the contacts. And so in the end, she ended up in the documents entrusting the artwork and certain funds to support what had to happen with that artwork to these individuals, and then letting her sister handle certain other things that made sense. But it's very important to think this through. Who is the best person to handle each part of your estate? As I talked about, preserving your legacy, avoiding conflict, and minimizing probate issues. So what do you want to happen? So again, I've referred to, artwork that you created, artwork that was given to you or purchased from others, and the intellectual property. I've also had a lot of people who've said to me, and this has happened both with artists using, painters and sculptors, but also I had a client who was a poet who felt the same way. She said, anything that's in progress, I want destroyed. That is not maybe what everybody would think, right? We've all seen exhibits of someone's half completed work or their papers or their sketches. I have some artists who say, I don't want that stuff out there. I want that stuff, maybe family could keep it privately, or I want it destroyed, but that's not something that I feel comfortable having out there. Whereas other artists feel very comfortable showing this unfinished work that they have. So these are options of what you can do with your art. So direct that certain pieces be sold, certain pieces be gifted. I had someone who said, I would want each of these 6 people to pick one piece that they want, and that's a gift to them. But then I want the rest to be sold or whatever it was that they chose. So you can get really pretty creative, and you can really make sure your wishes are followed if you have it all, and better in a trust than with the court in a will. Directing what happens with your copyrights, leave to an institution. It's a really good idea to check with that institution in advance and to come up with some sort of an agreement, because then it just further ensures that what you want to happen will happen. Also, Jamie mentioned it before, and I'm going to talk about the cataloging very minimally, but when it comes to dealing with the institution or cataloging, it is helpful for the person that you are leaving behind to handle these things for you to do as much of it while you're living as you can, because it's your art, you're intimately involved with it, you know what its value is to some extent, although that may change over time, but you can really engage in this process from the outset without waiting for it to all be done after your death. Donating to charity, specific beneficiaries, as I discussed, you can say specific pieces to specific people, or you could let them choose, like my other client did. You can create a further trust. So you can say, all my artwork is going to be left in this trust, and it's the Britt Berner Legacy Trust, and Britt Berner says that this person is going to handle it, and that person has the full discretion to sell or give away, and how the assets should be distributed. Maybe there's certain people who are income beneficiaries who receive income from the trust assets, etc. We can set that all up in a document that you create now. And sometimes creating a scholarship, for artists. I have some people who want to do that. So choosing the right person, both of the prior speakers talked about this, right? Picking your team. There's a reason we all talk about it, because the best laid plans can be destroyed by someone who doesn't understand how to handle it or isn't capable to handle it. And so you really want to make sure that you know who you want involved in this. I also always suggest putting successors. So as that person gets older, or maybe can't do it anymore for health reasons, or doesn't want to do it anymore, or is deceased, then we have successors set up. If you don't know who to name as a successor, you should make sure that your trust document says a method by which a successor can be chosen. So for example, I choose this one person because I really trust them, and I trust that they can name their successor. And that's an important thing. I'm just making sure I hit all these. I think we're good. I'm gonna get close to the end so we can make sure we have time for questions. So the cataloging and inventorying, I'm not going to go into that because James did a much better job at that than I could have. Separating out your works, the copyrights. Do you have the proper contracts in place, whether it's with your gallery? Where are they? Who knows what deals you have going? Are the copyrights attached to that? Who owns the copyrights? Storage, I think we went through all of these things. And here it is, can be done during your life or by your fiduciary. A fiduciary is just a fancy name for a trustee. It's anybody who's appointed. An executor is a fiduciary, a power of attorney is a fiduciary. It's somebody with a heightened standard of responsibility to the trust and its beneficiaries. And here are those numbers. So the federal is 12.92 million. And as was mentioned before, it sunsets in 2026. So what that means is if you die before January 1 of 2026 and your assets are under 12.92 million, there's no taxes. After 2026, it's likely to be about 6 million. It's 5 million index for inflation. So we won't know the exact number till that time, but figure around 6 or so million. So that's going to be a big drop. The good news for New Yorkers is we already planned for that 6.5 million amount because we have that exemption in New York. So in the federal government, when one spouse dies, the survivor can take, we call it portability, they can take any exemption that the first spouse didn't use in their estate. We don't have that in New York. It's use it or lose it. So we have to make sure that planning is in place. We also have a cliff in New York, which means you are taxed from $1. There is no exemption if you drop over the exemption. So no tax, no tax, no tax. You hit 6.58, you fall off the cliff and you have a tax from $1. Now, of course, New York is a lower percentage than federal, which is only taxing you on the overage. So, there's pros and cons everywhere, but it's something to watch. In New York, we have no gift tax. So if I give away $1 million and I live 3 years and a day beyond that gift, it's as if there was never, that million never existed. I don't have to report it. I don't, or there, you would file a gift tax return, but I don't have to pay taxes on it. It's like it was never there. If I die before that 3 years, it gets counted in my full estate amount. Federally, you have your lifetime exemption. So if I give away $1 million, that's a placeholder against my 12.92 million. So there are different regimes and you just have to be watching it. And that's it. I think I got through maybe a little bit over my time. So thank you to everyone. What I'm gonna do actually is go back to my first slide just so, well, maybe I have to stop sharing and go back just so you can see my contact information again. But I thank you all very much for letting me speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Britt. Great presentation. Does everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I just have to get to, let's see. Okay. Questions we had. Okay, let's see here. From Adrian, it says, are you saying that every will automatically goes to probate?
All wills go to probate if there's assets in somebody's individual name with no beneficiary. So if you have artwork that has to be handled, then that is an asset that is in your sole name without a beneficiary, unless you've assigned it to your trust and you create a trust.
Okay, next question from Geraldine Hanrahan. Does a revocable trust need a detriment on archived work?
What is it?
Okay, I'll repeat that. Does a revocable trust need a detailed document on archived work?
So what I usually do, well, I do a few different things. So it depends on exactly how you handle things. So in New York State, if you have a will, you can't, as we call it, incorporate by reference. So that means that if I have a will, my will can't say, go look at this other document and that other document's going to tell you how I want things distributed. But with a trust, you can do that. And so what I would do if you have a detailed inventory like that, and that inventory includes what you want to happen, your trust document can refer to that and pull it into your estate and incorporate it by reference. So I would say that your estate planning should refer to this other document. One thing I want to add is that at the back of your trust, we have what's called a Schedule A, and a Schedule A is how we list what's in your trust. It's in an informal list that you keep on your own as trustee. But for example, on the day you sign your trust, if you're also putting your home with a deed into that trust, and I'm signing it, the deed on that day, I will put in the Schedule A the address of the property. You would put the bank account numbers. But if you also had your artwork, but there was a detailed list, you would probably put on that Schedule A, see inventory, and so it was known that your works were assigned to the trust and that inventory is continually updated.
Next question from Seema. So are you saying to not get a will and instead do the revocable living trust?
Probably. There are still people who come in and see me, and when I discuss it with them, I discuss their family situation, I discuss who their beneficiaries are. We look at what all of their assets are, right? Like if you go to see a lawyer and they're not asking what all your assets are, you should run from that lawyer. They can't properly help you plan your estate if they don't know what you have. So there are still people who come in and I tell them that they don't need a trust. So I don't want everyone to think you need it. But I think in the vast majority of circumstances and growing, we're finding revocable trusts are really suiting people better.
Mhm.
And if you have a trust, we would usually recommend that you have what's called a pour over will. So if there's any straggler assets that don't make it into your trust, you'd only be probating for that asset and it would still get directed to be handled in the trust.
How
let's
about
see.
irrevocable?
Huh?
How
There
about
are
irrevocable?
there are irrevocable trusts, but I think I would need another 45 minutes. But that being said, there are on my website, there's a lot of webinars that are recorded, and we do a lot of these just open to anyone. So feel free to go look at those. But I couldn't even begin to start with that with the time we have.
Thank you.
Let's see, last question. If you have joint ownership in any asset, is probate still required?
No, probate's only sole name, no beneficiary. So if you have a joint owner, that's not your sole name. And so it would not be required until that second person died. The first death, it would go to the joint owner.
Okay, let's see. Babs Reingold has a question about gifting art. Babs, are you there?
Yeah, yep, I'm here. So I wasn't quite understanding, like right now when you're living and you gift art, you only get the value of the materials. So, which is like nothing. So the question is, I didn't quite understand when you're talking about this vast sums of money, when you're going to gift art while you're still living to get it away from you so you don't have to worry about it. How does any of that factor in to your lists of art and things that you've donated and along with things that you've sold? I just wasn't quite understanding the whole process of this amount of money that you're talking about versus gifting the art when you're alive versus maybe gifting the art after you die. And how does that work? Does it change any, or is it still to the artist only the value of the materials?
Well, it depends on the art. So there are some, if you gift art during your lifetime, then sure. First of all, I think that when the other people were talking about the gifting, they were talking less about it from a tax perspective. They were talking about it just from, it's a good idea to keep an inventory of what works have been given away or sold during lifetime so that the complete collection of someone's works can be known. I that was my understanding of what the others were saying, but they could clarify if it was different.
Okay. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
maybe I was just trying to figure out if there was some connection there. I get it. Yes, because I
think they
understand
were-
what happens when I donate and I don't get any money basically for that donation.
Right. Yeah, I think it was for different purposes. I don't know if Jamie's still on. She was the one referring to it, but I think that's what she meant.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see.
I will, this is Jamie. I will just say that my understanding of is that if a living artist gives their work away, they get time and materials for it. They don't get the market value of the piece of work. Because Bill willed all of his work to me, I'm not the artist. So I am able to retain the market value of any work that I sell, or that I give away. So I've just given work away to a number of museums. I can take that value of that work off of my taxes, the whole value of the work, not just his time and materials.
Yeah, because you're not the artist, but you don't even get the time. Honestly, our tax accountant doesn't give me time on the art. It's basically the materials. That's all an artist can do. Okay. Yeah.
May I get a question in? By the way, for Babs, I was at actually another terrific panel by this organization that artists swap art with each other, give it to each other. There was some very famous cases of that. And so then they gave it to you, you gave it to them, you get the full value, and then you can give it. So there's all kinds of things that can be done there.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
It was
That's a good,
someone,
that's
it was
a good
like
point.
Warhol and someone, or Pollock and someone ever, and they were like passing the art around. So, by the way, this is absolutely phenomenal. I am the daughter of an artist, Judy Siegel, who actually was very involved in the founding of OTOA, I don't know how to say it, and the early years. So, Judy Siegel, so feel like a daughter of this organization, and this is great. We did do some estate planning for my parents, and I'm now working on it myself. I don't have children, and so everything that you're saying really hits home with me. And we did have a good lawyer for my father. There was no will. Everything went through a trust. But here's my question, Britt. Now, maybe this is penny ante change, but there were some unclaimed funds of my mother's, small stuff. There was some refunds of this and that. There was some checks coming back, blah, 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 blah. I've had no letters testamentary, and there is no stuff from a probate court because we didn't go through probate. Everything exactly like what you said. And I understand that the probate court, and heard it from others, is unusually difficult. And so that avoiding it at all times is a very good idea. This is top advice. What do you do if you have these things to clean up about the estate and money that's coming to you, but you can't get it? No one can get it.
Yeah, I mean, so that's why at the very end, I said, we often recommend that when you have we're always recommend that if you have the trust, you also have a pour over will, so that you might have to go through the surrogate's court and get letters testamentary and probate for the purpose of collecting these other straggler assets.
I have to tell you, lawyers of your kind, I mean, maybe not for you have a good rate for this crowd, but everyone's charging $500 an hour. The amount of funds that are uncollected are probably $1,000 to go get these letters testamentary. It's going to be a higher bill than the funds.
Understood. I would say two things about that. One, that's why it's really important to make sure that when you're doing your estate planning, that you are looking at all the potential straggler assets. So unclaimed funds in an estate, that hopefully.
That's not possible. It's just not possible.
Okay. So you would like to look at and try and get all those things if you can. And then also there is, there are help desks at the surrogates court. So sometimes if people are only talking about, a few $1,000s and they can't afford an attorney to assist them, you can actually go down to the surrogates court and they will assist you with filing for probate.
Look, I don't want to drag this out, but
I mean, talk to your legislator. I don't know.
It's less money.
I live in the system. I don't make it. Yeah.
Okay.
I get it.
And your talk was, you really managed to put a lot of complicated ideas in a very short time. So very impressive. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so it's 8:30. I want to thank all of the panelists. This recording will be available, I would say, in a couple of weeks, where you can go on our atoanyc.org under YouTube and read it again, watch it again. Britt, one of the in the audience had asked if your services are available through VLA, Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts.
So what generally happens is people go to VLA and they do the intake with them. And then there's certain people that the VLA folks feel like are above their level of ability to assist. And then they'll usually refer the person to me. So I don't have any, and I don't have any formal, I would assume they have other lawyers they do this with as well. I don't have any formal relationship with VLA. I just got to know them and do some events for them.
Alrighty. Everyone, all three of you, you were terrific tonight. I would like to leave the last words to Eric, since he was the one that actually had pulled this panel together. So Eric, any last words?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak for myself, but I will address the fact that Britt Berner's presentation was excellent, as was Jamie's. I actually learned a lot. There are a lot of open matters that I still need to learn after all these years in the financial planning business. There's still a lot I need to learn. But what I got out of this also is the fact that we're a community here and we learn from each other. And the fact that I think it was Jessica who mentioned the idea of trading artworks with colleagues so that you can maximize the gifting is brilliant. It's very good. When Jamie and I were talking about this before the seminar, I said there's a lot of ambiguity about gifting, and I wasn't going to go that deeply into it because I know that Britt would probably be in a much better position to deal with that than I. But all in all, this was wonderful. I hope everybody else got as much out of it as I did. There's a lot to learn. It's complicated, but you know, if you get started on it, it's doable. I will say one thing that I neglected to mention, and fortunately Jamie did. A website, spending the time to develop a website for your work is pretty important, particularly if you are in search of a gallery. It's a very easy way for a dealer to access your work without the complications of personal visits unless they're really interested. And I neglected to mention it, so I apologize for that. But fortunately, Jamie did. But bottom line, this was terrific. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
I'd like, okay, I was just going to, on behalf of Artists Talking Art, thanks Mitch very much for organizing this evening, and to all the panelists for their generosity and sharing their expertise for their community of artists. And please note, this panel, as all others, will be available on YouTube, on the Artist Talk on Art YouTube channel. Somebody asked that question and I'm answering it now. This one will probably be maybe by the end of the week or beginning of next week. So you can view it again. But on behalf of Artist Talk on Art, thank you very much. And we hope to see you next week for the Women Arts panel with Beth Reingold. Thank you.
Hey, wait, can I say something about that arts panel? It's Grace Roselli who is doing the Pandora's Box. I am one of the speakers. So I am not the moderator,
well,
but
well,
just
thank you,
to let
but-
you know. Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
very much.